Hey everybody, I'm Jeff Kelly. I'm here with my good friend Tony Baer, who's of course an analyst at Ovum covering the data platform space. Tony, welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jeff.
So we're here at PostgresConf, and within the conference we've got Greenplum Summit. Give us a little taste of what the conference has been like for those who maybe can't be here.
Well, my sense, with Postgres, it's kind of like the not so little engine that could. It's this engine that they've been working on silently over the years, and now finally, after like decades, it's becoming an overnight success.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk about some industry trends that we're seeing. You wrote recently about the rise of embedded analytics. I feel like we've been talking about this concept of embedding analytics into software, operational software, so people can make in-the-moment decisions, either people or could be machines. We've been talking about it for a while, and I get the sense it's starting to really happen. Is that your sense, and why do you think it's starting to happen now?
Well, my sense is that basically the need is not new. The need has always been that we need to make smarter decisions. It's just that in the past, the technology didn't allow us to do that. We had to basically transact, and then afterward, then look at what we transacted.
Right.
And today, thanks to basically a number of trends, whether it be in cloud, whether it be in hardware, whether it be in software, in-memory processing, and so on, that we can now do this in the moment. And so therefore, it allows you to essentially optimize the transactions in the moment.
Right, and these are things that some of the big web companies have been doing for years, but now that technology is starting to become democratized, and you're seeing actual enterprises and more traditional industries taking these steps?
Yeah, well, it's starting. I mean, put it this way: part of it is the cloud. Part of it is the fact that in the cloud we have, that basically ordinary companies now have access to engines that actually do that. You also see that in the latest refresh of enterprise applications, from all the household names. So it is definitely something that formerly was an exception, and I think increasingly it's going to become a checkbox item, the rule.
Right, absolutely. Wanted to ask you about the whole data privacy question. Now, I know you don't cover data privacy specifically, but I'm sure you have some thoughts on how the public debate around the whole Facebook and Cambridge Analytica situation, for lack of a better term, how that is impacting some of the end users you talk to. Is it changing their thinking? Are there lessons there that enterprises can take from this?
Well, there's a whole perfect storm happening, which is one. There was the force of news events, which is, my God, you mean actually you really were sucking up my contacts, my phone book. And all of a sudden, you're basically, because I took this innocent little quiz about things I like on Thursday, and all of a sudden, all my friends are now involved in fake news. That's pretty scary stuff. There's also basically, the reality of regulation, and this is something which actually has been many years in the making. Of course, GDPR, which is taking effect in the EU. It's not just an EU regulation. Yes, it is. Technically it is, but it's any company that does business there, which means that any global company, which includes basically a vast majority of basically the global 2000, actually probably 100% of the global 2000 are going to be impacted by this. So it certainly has forced the issue. I think the difference, in terms of it, that was already happening, but when basically all the Cambridge Analytica stuff happened, it just all of a sudden blew what was essentially a backroom, basically regulatory issue into a very public.
Right, and what effect do you think that will have on the way companies approach analytics specifically?
Well, I think it's going to invite greater scrutiny, because if you take a look at how basically Cambridge Analytica took analytics to a pretty scary extent, the fact is that analytics were being conducted on personal records that were not necessarily adequately anonymized. Without consumers' consent. There's also the reality that even if you anonymize records, it is very easy through basically through tracking all the digital exhaust that you leave, that your anonymized records can be de-anonymized. So I think the fact is there's no question that that Ovum clients are coming to us and asking us how can we basically avoid becoming news headlines.
Right.
There certainly is a very heightened awareness of that.
But the need or the desire to use analytics to improve your business and make better decisions and serve your customers, that's not going away. So
that's not going away, but the thing is there is that tension between we want to get closer to the customer, we want to own the customer relationship, we want to get to one-to-one marketing versus we need to protect basically customer identities. So I mean there is, and I'm not going to call it a creative tension, it's going to, but it definitely is a real tension there. It is going to force basically organizations to really up their game. It's also incumbent upon both data platform vendors and analytics analytics vendors, the whole technology ecosystem, the whole marketplace is going to have to also raise their game in terms of here we can provide solutions that can help you make sure that you can essentially segment and basically isolate the data that you need to be isolated.
Right. So speaking of the database and analytical platform market, what is your take on that? I was thinking about what I've seen in this market over the years, having previously covered it as a reporter and an analyst, and I remember, I want to say, maybe about 10 years ago or so, it was all about data warehouse appliances. It was all about the appliance was the way to go. Easy to get into your data center and easy to get started. And then Hadoop kind of became the big thing. And now we're seeing cloud-based and really software-based analytical database platforms come to the fore. What is your take on where this market's going, where it is and where it's going?
Well, several things. One is I've seen basically a trend that's been going on for a number of years, and of course the Greenplum database is a good example of that in terms of your support of extended data types, being able to do JSON. Doesn't mean that with Greenplum you're going to replace MongoDB, but it means that those borderline data types that traditionally would not have fit in a relational data warehouse or an MPP data warehouse will now fit in there, and you don't have to go to a separate database. At the same time, we're seeing a lot of those NoSQL folks. It's not to say that database differences are going away. Each data platform will always have its unique mix of strengths. So that's one mega trend that we see. The other mega trend is very much is the cloud, so which it's a tectonic force that you cannot ignore. And on one hand, and for many years, for me, the cloud I can't say I was personally that interested. To me, it was like, oh, it's a deployment option. Except that when you take a look at how you start architecting databases for the cloud, it's a very different thing. Since I was in a presentation earlier about a major financial regulatory institution that's migrating their on-premise databases to the cloud and basically taking it as a transformational opportunity. So the fact is, I see cloud having a huge impact, and not just from the standpoint of deployment, but from the standpoint of being able to rethink how we manage data, how we basically expose applications as services, how we architect our databases. It is huge.
Is it? Is that in line with things like containerization of analytical databases? Is that where you're going?
Containers, microservices, which means that to a certain extent, this is not new. We were talking about a lot of these ideas back during the days of the Spring Framework, back during the days of service-oriented architectures. It's just that today we've basically made all the protocols a much more lightweight, so therefore a lot more repeatable. So we're not talking about the WS stack of quote simple object access protocol, which is anything but simple. We're talking about basically looking at containerization. We're seeing some de facto standards, emerging Docker in terms of packaging, Kubernetes in terms of orchestrating this. And so I think this in turn really also plays into this whole sort of cloud native, how we can re-architect data warehouses so that different applications different workloads can operate kind of independently without having to interfere with other workloads as noisy neighbors.
And I think this ties back into our earlier discussion about embedding analytics into applications,
exactly.
Exposing them as microservices and that kind of thing.
Because transaction workloads and analytic workloads have different resource footprints. And when you start to containerize microservices, it allows you to manage that in a much more fine-grained fashion and really be able to have them live very happily after together.
It's only taken 10, 20 years, right? We've been talking about.
It's an overnight success.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of getting back to the Postgres community and open source in general, what's your take on how open source is impacting this market? I mean, I think years ago, I think people were talking about, well, is it gonna really hurt the market, at least from a vendor perspective, because it's hard to monetize? How has that played out, and how do you see it continuing to?
Well, I think Scott Yarrow's story was actually quite powerful there, which is that when he first formed the company, he thought, let's go open source, and he basically got advice saying, no, don't do that, because basically if you're giving it away for free, that's basically how your customers are going to value it. And we've gone through, I guess, sort of a shift, which is that now today, basically big Wall Street institutions who used to be the paragons of proprietary technology, not just proprietary technology from vendors, but their own proprietary technology, saying, something, for core infrastructure technology, we want open source because that's where the innovation happens, that's where we have our choice, that's where we can avoid the lock-in. It's a huge revolution. And one of the interesting things is, for instance, like seeing FINRA, for instance, saying, by the way, we've developed a gateway, we're going to open source this. It's a very much of a change of mindset, but it also means for many vendors, it's become a checkbox item, which is that if you're not open source, tell us why.
Right. So my last question. So we've talked a lot about different types of analytics, different deployment options, where this market is going. If I'm an enterprise who's, maybe I have a mature data warehouse operation, but I'm not really doing any kind of advanced analytics, that's becoming something that's necessary. how do I get started? What's some advice you would give to those types of enterprises?
One is basically baby steps. I mean, number one, you probably have had some experience with data marts or data warehousing, and so therefore, I would basically take it that that initial step, and then and then the other part is then gradually start looking like ask other business units. By the way, we've been basically taking a look, for instance, at customer churn. Are there is there other information in terms of, let's say, their buying habits or the proclivities that you might be interested in basically sort of piggybacking on, and from there you kind of sort of gradually expand the use cases. So I would say basically take an incremental approach.
Great. All right, well, Tony, I'll let you get back to the conference. Thanks for taking some time. It was a great conversation.
Okay, Jeff. Good
to see
talking.
you again.